Hello everyone, welcome back to the Christ MotoGP Podcast. Summer break is here, first half of the season is done. Marc Marquez has a 120 point lead. Yeah, it kind of went from nothing to this big massive gap in the space of 5 rounds. We're here to talk about the weekend at Brno where Marquez again has done the double. Controversy on Saturday, well, I don't know what to call that, tire pressure stuff, we'll get into that shortly. But joining me, Jordan Moreland as ever, to discuss it all is Pete McLaren and Lewis Duncan. Lewis, just to start with Mark, 120 points as I say. You put an interesting tweet out yesterday saying that his title rivals have made his life unnecessarily easy with the mistakes and the bad sort of form that they've had. I don't think it really matters at this point, does it? Because he has simply been on another level, hasn't he?
Well, yeah, and that's why they've made it too easy for him, because when you've got a rider in this level, 8 Grand Prix wins, 8 of those, all 8 of them have been double weekends as well, so, you've got Pecco Bagnaia, double world champion, that hasn't had the form. You've got Alex Marquez, who has kind of been his nearest rival, but, recent times has made quite a lot of mistakes, pointless weekend in Brno, crashes in Assen. You'd think back to Qatar, he was off the podium and Marquez won, same, non-finish at France, Marquez on the podium. They have kind of handed Marc this championship. Marc's done hard yards, obviously, getting the results in, but they've kind of made sure that he's almost taken double from every weekend. And now we're at over half distance now, summer break, and we have a 120 point lead, which, okay, yeah, the points are a bit different, but I don't think we've had a situation like this, when someone has been so utterly, already basically champion without being champion. Not even, even back to 2019, Marc was 78 points ahead, which was a big margin back then, but, we saw quite a lot of races where he was beaten. We saw, Mugello and Austria and Silverstone, there was, people were still kind of taking it to him. There was still a lot of fighting there, and, but now there just isn't, because his level is such that he doesn't really have any rivals on the grid now. And, the only real way that he's not winning this championship now is injury. I think a lot of people are maybe holding out hope that we'll see a 2022 repeat of, Pecco when he came from 91 points behind. But, you have to look at that in the context of that was Pecco on the best bike on the grid going up against Fabio Quartararo on a Yamaha that was rapidly falling down the grid. It didn't have the same competitiveness as the Ducati. So, yeah, we had different tracks, different conditions, different, circumstances within races, and we've seen Marc come through all of them. He doesn't make the mistakes he did at the start of the season now. There is no more words to kind of sum up how good he's been this year, and there also aren't enough words to kind of really criticise his rivals either. They have let him get away with this one, and they are going to have to really dig in now for the second half of the season to at least give him something to think about. But looking into next year, they're going to have to really, really work hard. His rivals, the other rival manufacturers, are going to have to work really, really hard to get anywhere near to the consistency that Marquez has had. And you can't see that changing, once we come back from the summer break.
No, you can't. Just 5 rounds, 10 race wins, 185 points. First Ducati rider in history to do 5 Grand Prix wins in a row. You think about the history of Ducati and MotoGP, having Casey Stoner, and he went on a pretty dominant run, even going back to 22 with Pecco. He won 4 in a row, and it looked like it was going to be 5 that time when him and Bastianini went up against each other at Aragon, but he didn't do it. And I think that it sums that, for me, when you see Marc in this form, like you touched on it there about any condition, any track, doesn't matter anymore. It's like he just wins. Like I don't understand, and I can't emphasize it to people enough. He just wins no matter what now. And I was thinking, with this tire pressure thing on Saturday, I thought, well, he's obviously cooked it here. I think maybe he's not done enough, but the calmness of him, and this is the context of it, he had like a 2.7 second lead in a sprint race, and he just sits up and he looks around, waits on Acosta. It's quite funny when you watch the onboard now, looking at it. He's just looking, where is he? I'll just sit him behind now. I am waiting. Imagine being Pedro Acosta thinking, why is he letting me pass there, sort of thing. And then you just hear him constantly on you, and he makes his move like nothing else has happened, and you're thinking, yeah, he calculates things in his brain so well. And the first half of this season, the turning point was Silverstone. You could sense how pissed off he was from that weekend, and he kind of said after that, I won't be making the same mistakes again. I know why. And I think he's kind of proven that, hasn't he, Pete, with the, as Lewis says, the 5 weekends, double race wins, maximum points. Doesn't matter if he starts in pole position or not. He is just in complete control, isn't he?
He is, isn't he? Yeah, I think he even admitted, didn't he? It's his to lose now, and for Mark to say that is quite something, because he's normally, he knows how racing can turn, and even he knows the situation he's in now is a dominant one. The only thing he fears is injury, isn't it? As he also said, and as you guys have brought up there. But yeah, 120 points. I mean, that's all the points in the sprint races for the remainder of the season. I mean, that's the lead he's got. So take Saturdays off if he wants to make a race of it for everyone else, I suppose. But as you say, that sprint race just showed the margin he's got over the others, isn't it? When he needs to really push, he can overcome giving his nearest rival giving up a 3-second lead to his nearest rival and still win pretty comfortably, really, wasn't it? And that's it. I think it's just, it's the best rider on the best bike situation, isn't it? And adaptability, as you guys have also said, is whatever the circumstances, whatever the track. We've seen him adapt to the bike that obviously is not an easy bike to ride to get the most from, because Pecco can't do it quite often. We've seen Fabio Di Giannantonio have a terrible weekend also. So it's not, the bike is not doing it for him. He's adapting to it. He's worked it out. He's figured it out. And I think he's adapting from track to track what he needs. Brno was a weird one, so much grip, so much rear grip. And we saw with the different manufacturers and riders coming up towards the front compared to previous races. And yet again, that one constant is that Marc Marquez is at the front and really never looked that ruffled, did he? I mean, he did say over the weekend that he's kind of calmed his riding style, hasn't he, after the arm injury. So we're not seeing him manhandling the bike in the way that we used to with the Honda, where it was more clear that he was on the limit. But still, he never really looks like he's under that much pressure, does he, at the moment? And it's all there for him now, massively going into the remainder of the season. And I suppose we should say that one of the main rivals, who of course came back this weekend, was Jorge Martin. He's one of the guys probably coming into the season. We were looking at who's going to fight Marc or who's going to be his nearest opponent. Pecco, obviously, maybe Jorge Martin as the reigning champion, depending on how he gets on with the Aprilia. Aprilia, again, looking pretty consistent now, isn't it, with Marco Bezzecchi? So it is a shame that we were kind of robbed of potentially Martin at least taking the fight to Marc in some races with that bike. But as we now know, Martin's made his decision for next year, so we can perhaps look forward to that in 26. But certainly for the rest of 25, it's Marc's to lose.
Yeah, absolutely. I think just on the rivals, I think this weekend, Lewis, we kind of seen a lot of them just kind of go, can't fight this guy here, like sort of thing. Pecco put a statement out on his Instagram. He has a little sort of, how can I say, a little group you can be in where he gives his thoughts after a race, and he said he has to be a realist now, and he has to think that Alex Marquez is his target. He says, I can't fight with Marc. It's not possible this year. What do you think of that when you hear the guy who was tipped to be the guy to take it to Marc this year, when he just can't live with him? It's really sort of telling at the halfway point, isn't it?
Yeah, I think it's not really surprising. I haven't seen the quote, but yeah, I mean, the kind of general consensus from Pecco kind of on Sunday night was that this is kind of too far out of reach, and even Alex Marquez said the same thing. It's probably the biggest disappointment of this season. We've seen what Pecco can do over the last few years, and we expected, I think the expectation was that Marc would be the favourite to win the championship, but we expected more of a battle from Pecco. I think there was a lot of people, in the paddock, sort of looked to Pecco and going, he will raise his level here. We will surprise, and he just hasn't. And the bike hasn't quite suited him. But as Pete's mentioned, it isn't sort of the perfect bike, and yet Marc has been able to adapt to it. And Pecco has said this quite a lot. Marc can ride anything, I can't. And unfortunately, as a world champion, as a champion rider, you have to adapt. That you can't wait for the bike to be perfect for you. You have to get there, and he hasn't, and that's been disappointing. And it's not really gotten any better. We're now at the summer break and he's still having the same problems he was in Thailand. We thought, pole position, maybe something might change here. And he was unlucky in the sprint. This electronic glitch that led to kind of tyre pressure warning was unfortunate. And then it got to a point where he was just like, nothing I'm doing here is working, so I'm going to get a penalty. So what is the point in overtaking again? Which is a problem in itself, and we'll talk about that later. But it just he just hasn't been able to adapt, and the other manufacturers weren't. We needed Pecco to be up there because the other manufacturers weren't ready. We know the Japanese manufacturers are well far behind. We know Aprilia needed quite a bit of work to get there. We knew coming into the season after the testing that KTM wasn't in a position to be able to fight. So we were relying on Pecco here to have this fight, and it hasn't happened. And even going up against Alex Marquez is going to be tricky because for the most part this year, Pecco's his limit has been third. That's what he has been. That is his absolute peak at the moment, is third. He's only been the lead factory Ducati twice in races, and both of those races were when Marc crashed out. It wasn't a reflection of pace. And I think that is the thing that you'll have to go into the summer break and do a bit of soul searching here and think, okay, the bike is the bike.
Yeah.
Marc's making it work. I'm a double world champion. I have to be doing a better job here. So let's see when we get to. If there's one place that's really going to kind of prove that he's made a step or not, it'll be Austria. A place where he's been dominant before. Hard braking, so he needs. That's his strength, and that's been his weakness this year. So, that's kind of he has to view the Red Bull Ring as a reset. And if he doesn't really come away from that weekend having made any real genuine progress, none of this, I felt like I made a bit of a step, because that hasn't translated into results. If he hasn't come away from that making any tangible progress, you look at that as the rest of the season is set. And then even going into next year, you're looking at this being a kind of a difficult step for him to make, because the bike isn't really going to change. So, yeah, I think Pecco is, when we get to the end of the season, we do our rankings of riders. Unfortunately, Pecco's going to be very low down based on what we expected and what we should expect from a double world champion.
Yeah, just on that, I think we're going to do next week. Gents, I haven't told you, but we're going to do a half-season review almost and give a report. We can kind of compare it from next week, and then we'll do it at the end of the year, look back where we grade people. So we can't, just to give you that Pecco quote from Instagram if anyone's interested. He says, surely the approach to the season has changed after these many races, as it's hard to think about fighting with Marc in these conditions. We must be realists. We need to reset and do the best we can, keeping Alex Marquez as our reference point. So I think his last quotes of the first part of the year, he's going to go into this summer break thinking, right, forget Marc, it's done. I don't even know what the gap is, and I think it's 160 odd points, I think.
168.
Yeah, so that's massive, so it is. So yeah, with Pecco, let's see what he does when he gets to Austria, because as Lewis says, I'm thinking right in saying he's won every single race there since 2022, including Sprint and Grand Prix, so yeah, and it's a track I think he's dominated the most throughout his MotoGP career, where you can see he wins by like 3-4 seconds at times. So yeah, that's, if Marc goes there and beats him again handsomely, what can you say, sort of thing. But yeah, let's get on this sprint debate with the tyre pressures. There was a lot of confusion in there, Pete, wasn't there? Obviously Marc seems that it was the only, there's two other riders I think that had warnings, but then the Dorna system wasn't set correctly, and then that created confusion too about the alert of getting who's notified for a penalty and who's under investigation. Kind of touched on it there with Marc having such a big lead, then he has to drop back and sit. Like, that's not entertaining at all, is it? It's like, it's artificially just, it's odd. I can't imagine being someone who turns on MotoGP for the first time on a Saturday, thinks, let's see what they're doing. Why is the guy in the lead slowing down and then sitting in second place? So it's, as a viewer, as a new viewer, as a fan of for many years, it is the most frustrating thing, isn't it, about this rule?
Yeah, I mean, it seems like there was three different scenarios going on in this sprint with tyre pressures, wasn't there? So Pecco had a problem. It seems a glitch, some sort of electronic issue. So yeah, he was not getting the correct information about his tyre pressures. Then it seems that apparently Marc was getting the correct information and was genuinely under, and then of course we saw him back off, take action, and then go on and win the race. But Ducati was still looking pretty pensive afterwards, weren't they? So there's some people that think that actually there was a problem with Marc as well, and that, who knows. But then the third scenario was then the race direction problem, as you say, which is unconnected to the Ducati issue with Pecco, let's say, with their warning system apparently being set too low. Now, the reason for this is that the setting too low or incorrectly set issue is that we know that Michelin's front tyre pressure is 1.8 bar. That's what it's set at. But it actually moves a bit from race to race because it depends on the type of tyres, the track, etc., etc. So therefore, I think we can assume that at Sachsenring maybe it was a bit higher, or it was higher than it was at Brno. Let's put it that way. The number for the minimum was then not tweaked in the race direction system, presumably for Brno, and so that's why they thought that these three riders, Marquez, Agura, Rins, hadn't made the minimum pressure from the live data they were getting, when actually they had, if you put in the correct value. Now, whether that was also what went on with Marc as well, impossible for us to know, whether they had the correct number in or not. But that seems to be what went on there. So we all thought, this is an absolute nightmare for tyre pressures. We've got 3 different teams here that are having issues, et cetera, et cetera. And it turned out actually a lot of them were just sort of phantom warnings that didn't exist. I mean, it's more something that we've had enough normal tyre pressure issues, haven't we, over the years? But here was something completely different again. So, I suppose from Bagnaia's explanation, we got to hear a bit more about how the Ducati system works. 30% of a sprint distance, isn't it, is what you need. So it was nice and easy maths, 10 laps race, so 30%. He needed 3 laps. And he said the counter didn't move, didn't he? Or it didn't count down. So we can assume that when he started the race, there was a number 3 probably on his dash. He's waiting for that to go 2, 1, you're fine. It didn't move. He gets to the half race distance and probably you got all these warnings appear, because then there would only be 5 laps left. You've got to get 3 of them in the right amount of pressure. But of course, when you back off, that lap will be gone because you've backed off. So then so that's why probably they both reacted at the same time. Marc presumably got the similar warning, but we're not exactly sure what went on there. And ultimately there wasn't really an issue, was there? But we're all kind of in the dark of what's going on here. We've seen, what was it, previously, we didn't get this post-race notification, did we? About, it looks like someone's under pressure. Now, if they hadn't have done that, then we wouldn't have known that they actually, it was set at the wrong value and everything else. But because nobody likes, and there's nobody you'll find, I don't think anywhere, that likes people going up on the podium, finishing a race, and then the result changing. So we've seen there's pressure to put out a warning at least, so that people are at least aware, hang on, this guy might be under, this guy isn't. But this is the downside of that, I guess, is that they don't have time to actually check everything properly, which would have shown them, oh, hang on, the minimum was set at the wrong, too high. These guys were actually in, etc., etc. So it's just another, it's another angle on the whole tyre pressure thing. I know people were comparing it with Phillip Island, where they 03, Valentino Rossi.
That's right,
everyone remembers that race, and that is true. It does add drama, but only if it all works out in the end, as it did with Rossi still winning the race, and as it did with Marc still winning the race. People tend to forget the races like Donington 03, where Rossi lost the race due to the same thing 2 hours after the race. I mean, no one's going to look back and go, well, that was a classic race because, Rossi was stripped of the win 2 hours later. So, I'm not sure it does really add much to the drama, shall we say. But there we are. It was just, 3 different scenarios going on. And, another angle on the tyre pressure. I suppose we should say, just finally on this, that Marc does agree with having a rule about the tyre pressure, doesn't he? He was asked, and he said it's for safety reasons. Although he did bring up that maybe it's too much. Maybe 8 seconds in the sprint is too much. 16 in the Grand Prix.
Thinks it should be 4 seconds, doesn't he, or so in the sprint? Right, it should be half of what it is, whatever. I think he said. So I get that point.
I was going to say, if that is the case, just finally on that, if you did halve it though, that would give you, in that case, Marc would have been better off not backing off, wouldn't he? And
he would have just had to do another 1.2 seconds, and he would have won the race.
He'd have done it. But is that really better than? I don't know. Because it's just going to mean that riders are not. We're going to end up with more results being changed after the checkered flag or penalties. I don't know. You can look at that either way. So basically, I don't know whether any of the any the wiser coming out of this sprint situation as to what should be changed. But I think everyone would like to see it simplified, definitely.
Yeah, definitely. And I'll bring in Lewis on this one because, just again, Lewis, it just. You take it because I feel like you're gonna say some really interesting things on this.
It's just the safety aspect is fair enough. There does need to be a rule. There always has been some sort of safety measure in place for tire pressures, but it has gotten worse over the past few years because of the loads being generated on the front tires. But fundamentally, that has always been on the tire supplier to provide a tire to meet those demands. Remember, you think back to 2005, the US Grand Prix in F1, and
right.
all those Michelin tires blowing up because they weren't strong enough. So that led to a farcical situation there, back in the tire war era. But fundamentally, Bridgestone had built a better tire; they could cope with it. And so as far as I've always been concerned, the onus is always on the tyre supplier to build a better tyre. Now, to Michelin's credit, they did do that. They developed this experimental front tyre that was, a bit stronger but a bit lighter to deal with the tyre pressures, to not be affected so much by hot air and wake from bikes ahead. So it was supposed to kind of eliminate the kind of the jeopardy of the tire pressure thing, but also improve racing, because these two things do go hand in hand. Ultimately, the reason why the racing has been quite bad this year and for the past few years is because of all the aero and all the tire pressures. If your tire pressure gets too high, it becomes very, very hard to actually control the front, and then you see crashes, and so people can't overtake. But they didn't really kind of enforce much in the way of testing, because the manufacturers and teams were like, well, we've got things to try in our own program for the season ahead. This is last year, so we're not going to waste time on something for next year. Misano last year was when it was finally put in the bin, because they were given half an hour to test this tyre. And after that, Michelin were like, oh, we can't introduce it. We haven't had enough time. Now, in an 8-hour test day, why are you dedicating half an hour to something that, as far as I'm concerned, seems quite important? Because surely one of the two key things have to come from any rule change. Whatever the change is good for safety and also good for the spectacle.
Yeah.
Which this tyre was going to be. And then, of course, now Michelin's leaving the championship. They've binned off development altogether, because what's the point there for them? Which is fair enough, but ultimately, MotoGP and the teams and the manufacturers all have to take full responsibility for this, because, well, yes, Michelin has a role to play. They had the tyre. There was an opportunity to do something here to get it pushed through, and the manufacturers and the championship didn't do anything about it. Now, people go, oh, well, there's an ecosystem. They can't just force manufacturers to do things, or they might leave. Yeah, okay. None of the manufacturers were going to be leaving if Dorna was like, okay, this Monday test day, here's a 3-hour window you have to test this front tyre exclusively. Was Ducati going to go to Dorna's offices and be like, we're leaving the championship, here's our exit fee money, we're gone? Of course they weren't. And no, some teams, manufacturers might have kicked up a fuss, but fundamentally, if the championship went, this is what we're doing, get on the bus or piss off, much like they did over 10 years ago with the CRT regulations. There was a lot of kickback from the manufacturers, but ultimately Dorna was like, we're doing this, or our entire championship is going to be turned into this, and you're not going to like that, so do what we want for the better of the championship, and it'll all work out fine. And sure enough, it did, because a few years later, grid numbers boosted, more manufacturers back, great racing.
Yeah.
That was it. Everyone has to take blame here, and we've ended up again with a stupid, farcical situation that makes MotoGP look like an amateur championship. I've been to club races in the UK that have been well organised and have better regulations and better stewarding or race direction decisions. Sorry, this isn't really a stewarding issue. Than MotoGP has with this tyre pressure rule. And, okay, the glitch in the system thing, that's one thing. That happens, fine.
Yeah.
These things do happen. Technology is not is not infallible. It's just that I think race direction kind of unfairly criticised for that. It happens sometimes. Brno was a funny one as well, because the new track surface and the lack of dry time meant that nobody really had any idea how it was going to go. Ducati and Marc said, we set the pressures thinking that the front tyre was going to be worked a bit harder than it actually was, which is kind of what we heard in Thailand when he was new to the bike. So these mistakes do happen, but there is also an element there that in wet races, we don't have the tyre pressure rule. So maybe when we get to news tracks or new track surfaces where we don't have any data, maybe that rule has to be relaxed a bit as well. Because what we saw at Brno was just stupid. A rider who'd done the hard work was 3 seconds in front almost, just setting up and being like, bye, come through, on you go. And the worst part about that for me was that we saw Marc was clearly too fast to sit behind Pedro Acosta. So we were looking at someone, Acosta, pushing like crazy to try and win this race, and clearly a futile attempt because Marc was so fast, like he was almost running into the back of him at points. So that isn't spectacle. And then we have the whole post-race tyre drop, which is crap. We saw that, what was it, Misano last year or Indonesia last year, where we had the whole, Pedro Acosta thing with the bent tyre wheel, and then obviously at that point the stewards were like, oh, we're not actually going to investigate this until next week now, which was another can of worms open there, which nobody was happy about.
Yeah.
It doesn't. MotoGP made this big deal about it. Oh, it added space. It didn't. It was artificially created something that didn't need to be there, and it didn't make the race exciting. It made it stupid. And we're now, Liberty's coming and is trying to sell this championship to new fans, and they're going to look at that and go, how stupid is this? Why do we want to watch that? It's one of the reasons that Formula E has struggled to find a massive viewer base, because every time something happens, post-race penalties, it's kind of a running joke that Formula E, that what you see on finish is not actually what's going to be there in the result sheet. And it's a bad look for a championship. It always has been. Yes, it's a safety issue and there should be a rule there, but like we've had minimum tyre pressures for a long, long time. And, off the top of your head, when was the last time you saw a front tyre fail because it was being run under 1.8 bar?
Yeah.
That's it. Yes. Obviously, things have changed with the aero, but there was a solution put in place, or Michelin was working on a solution, and MotoGP and the manufacturers cut the nose off to spite the face. So now we're stuck with this crap rule, crap racing for the next year and a half, which, isn't great for the fans. It's not great for media interest. It's all right for this is our job, but one of the key things that Liberty needs to do is obviously attract new media. The more mainstream kind of media, that your BBCs, your things like that, the national newspapers that don't come to these races anymore. You're not really going to do that if you've got a joke championship that has a joke rule that fundamentally spoils the racing. It does. That is the reality of it. Yeah.
I agree. I think that everyone's kind of to blame in this. Partly goes to the teams and the riders not really getting involved with this new tyre, and it was there. And then even going back to the Aragon test, we heard a few riders, Pete, talking about don't really need it anymore now. Just it was split. Some people were happy to use the new tyre. Maverick Vinales wanted a new tyre. He was really vocal about it. But then you heard some other riders being like, I didn't even bother trying it. You're thinking, you just need someone above to be like, listen here, you're trying this for 2 hours. We want a decision right now. Like, don't even, like, there's no say in this for you. And as Lewis says, manufacturers aren't going to leave a championship because, they might kick back on something. They want to win still, no matter what. And the CRT point's really valid. And I think that, everyone's kind of looked silly out of all this. And I can't wait for the rule to disappear in 27 or whatever happens to it. And we get new tyres and stuff. But the point for me, and Lewis touched on it for media interest, I seen a lot of the Dorna MotoGP official accounts saying, as Lewis said, it added spice. They were kind of trying to make it like it was a good thing. It's not a good thing. Like, if you had have looked at that as a snapshot, you had Pedro Acosta versus Marc Marquez, but as Lewis says, that should be a good thing. But then you look at Pedro Acosta, who's absolutely wringing the neck at the KTM, and Mark sitting there on a Sunday ride behind him, just trying to wait until his dashboard tells him he's free to go. Like, that's not racing. It's boring. It's stupid. So it is. It shouldn't be that way. And a lot of the confusion I see as well, people don't understand this rule. And it's really hard to explain to them, whether they're a seasoned fan or not. They're like, why is this rule in place? And I'm like, do you have to really get into this? Do you want to start speaking about it? It's boring. Like, that's the whole thing I don't like about it. It's stupid, boring. Yeah, it is for safety. Yeah, I get that. But it's just it could have been fixed, and it's just not. That's what annoys me. It's just one of those. It's like a leaking. No, it's like a leaking tap in your house for so long, where you're just like, I'll be fine. Just let it drip and drip and drip, and then eventually it's just like, I need to get that fixed now. And before you know it, your kitchen's flooded, and you're like, oh, what am I gonna do? I have to wait and get a new kitchen now, sort of thing. It's like that, and yeah, just can't wait for it to disappear. Pete, I'll let you have the final word on it. You kind of said a few good things last year about it with the common sense rule of it, and I always like that take of where, it should be race by race, common sense, and all this, shouldn't it? It shouldn't just be blanket. It looks fine on paper when you read the rule, but there should be some adaptation points to it, shouldn't there?
Yeah, I'm still trying to get over Marc Marquez as a plumber, but but yeah, I mean, you guys have raised so many points there, but I suppose the first one is I was always keen on having a bit of a warning if you're close, but in reality, that's still going to be, you're still going to have the issue of people finishing a race and then having to go back and check check through the data and everything else. I spoke to Piero Taramasso, some people might have read the story on Crash. I said, look, could this rule evolve a bit more? Things like that. It's obviously decided by the Grand Prix Commission. No one has one say over it. So, he's saying, well, look, we're open to it. They know that people hate these penalties after the race. He thought that, doing it in the race. So maybe, there's some way that if you're not you don't meet the minimum pressure, let's say at least once in the first 3 laps, then something happens and then it's done or something like that. But again, it's not ideal. It all comes down to there's such fine margins now. All the teams are chasing such fine margins and I think they don't want to give anything away to the others. So that's why things that in the past they were willing to say, that team always runs a bit low, but whatever. We've got the best rider and he makes that up on the brakes or something. Now everything is so close. Was it 1 second of the whole grid in warm up on Sunday that everything is being looked at and everything is, and it ends up with things being measured more and more and more. You guys bring in 27 Pirelli, which is also a good one. I mean, what's going to happen then? Will Pirelli adopt this system, or will they say, no, we don't want anything to do with this, or we want a different system, or are they going to come in with different ideas? What will their tyres be like as far as resisting the heat of other bikes? Obviously, they'll be coming in designing tyres for this new era from scratch. Mm-hmm. So with the aero, etc., they won't have the ride height devices, so they won't have to worry about that. But they'll have in mind right from the start this needing to resist the heat, but it's still going to be an issue if there is a rule and it's measured and someone is too close to it, like Marc. What do you do with it? Are we still, how are they going to get around Marc having to back off in the race and things like that? Because another good point that I think you guys sort of hinted at is, imagine if they'd have tangled Marc and Pedro. When after Marc had backed off, suddenly then you've got all the controversy of, well, Marc wouldn't even have been with him if he was just racing normally. Etc., etc. So, as I say, it comes back to what I said about Rossi. If it works out, it all looks great, and everyone says that's nice drama. But if it doesn't, it can be a nightmare. I mean, you could decide championships over it, as we've said. Other people could get tangled up. Acosta, if he somehow got distracted by having Marc behind him or overtaking for a second time when he didn't really need to under normal circumstances. What if he'd have lost the front and crashed out? There's lots of things that could have gone wrong when you have this kind of artificial racing in a way of guys being reduced to let other guys by. I mean, no one really wants to see that in racing, do they?
No one does. Lewis, anything to add?
I think the one thing as well we haven't mentioned is obviously the way that the teams have to approach the tyre pressure setting up, because they're effectively having to guess as to how their race is going to pan out. So, we saw that, I think, last year at Jerez in the sprint. Fabio Quartararo came from 23rd in the grid, so Yamaha set his tyre pressure to be really, really low to begin with, because it would balloon up to the minimum pressure pretty quickly, because they were expecting to run in a pack. He ended up third because 9 riders crashed out in front of him, and then he got a penalty. And it's how can you possibly calculate for that? How can you possibly assume that, okay, well, a rider's going to come through from 23rd, is going to make up 20 places, but that's because lots of crashes are going to happen in front of him? That's not a scenario that happens very often, and I'm sure there'll be people out there, oh, why don't they use AI or whatever? But that's not racing. You can't calculate racing. Fundamentally, you can predict whatever you want, but racing is racing. It's going to go the way that racing is going to go, and that's the biggest problem. You set your tire pressure up for one thing. Maverick Vinales in Qatar. He was sixth on the grid and was 10th in the sprint. So I think KTM admitted, they were like, yeah, we had absolutely no expectation that he was going to end up leading the Grand Prix. So he tried to do that sort of thing where to let the rider through. But the problem then was that Marc ended up being too fast for him to get the heat off the bike to raise his tire temperature. So then he loses a podium, all because he was better than the team expected him to be, but was penalised because of quite a clunky rule. I think it's too rigid. It doesn't. There has to be sort of an element there, as Pete's mentioned before, of kind of human input there, of looking at the tire pressure and going, okay, well, it was set correctly, and it was in the right pressure window for here, but we can see that since you got into this position, it's gone down, and there was nothing you could do about it. Okay, yes, you are under the minimum, but you didn't do it deliberately. You ended up in a situation that was, unexpected based on your calculations. You're no penalty here. That type of thing. Or you tweak the penalty so it's like, okay, they were under the tire pressure, but we're not going to ruin the result here. We'll give you a grid penalty for the next race or a long lap or something. There has to be a bit more kind of. Yeah, a bit more of a common sense approach and a bit more of a racing minded approach to this, and that this rule is really hard for riders because the riders can't do anything about it. They don't set the pressures, and they can only control it in the very limited ways that they can, which is either run in free air or run behind bikes. And as we've mentioned, you have a whole load of crashes. That's not easy. Germany's a perfect example. I mean, it's kind of surprising nobody ended up with the tire.
No one got one exactly. Yeah,
given you had so many people crashing out in front of you, so there does need to be some more kind of human input and common sense applied to it, because every example of the tire pressure kind of limit being a problem for riders is always different. They don't happen in the same way. The races don't happen in the same way. So that's why the rule kind of fundamentally doesn't work.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, Pete, you can add something to that.
Yeah, just a really quick one. I mean, for me, and just on the whole thing of simplifying, I would say, and following on from what you guys have said, if someone can meet the minimum pressure for one lap in a race, for me, that should be enough. Because how much can you drop? If you've been able to do that, okay, maybe you deliberately sat behind someone in the early stages. But, there's only going to be a certain amount that you can drop in a race if you're high enough that you can be legal if you're behind someone, and that will be known. And I think that would be a lot easier. And then you could just literally have a tick box by each rider that once you've done that lap, whatever happens after that, if you run off, the example that Lewis has quite rightly said, if an incident happens, if you find yourself with a big gap, doesn't matter. You've proven that you're legal for at least one lap. Therefore, how much more can you drop below that mark? There's only so much you could go down. That for me, I think would be some sort of reasonable compromise, but let's see. But anyway, also the teams are obviously going to have to check their warning systems, because even if they're all legal, if they have an issue like Bagnaia had, we're going to see people backing off for no reason, and that's ultimately just as bad, because if you back off, whether it's because you actually needed to or you're getting the wrong message, the end result is that you're as we've said, artificially backing off, letting people by, and nobody wants to see that.
Absolutely. And I just think back to last year, there was incidents with, I think, Marc Marquez and Assen, where Bastianini ran him off track, and Gresini were fairly confident that was the reason why he got a tire pressure penalty, because
he was 0.1 down.
It was nothing, so it was. So, and I think even back again, using Gresini as an example last year, imagine Frankie Carcetti and stuff having to work out when Marc Marquez is 13th on the grid, where he's going to be at the end, and he kept finishing on the podium. That must be a nightmare, trying to set tire pressures to be like predicting, as Lewis says. That's the element I'm like, you have to give these riders, teams, some credit here to try and work it out, because they, to their credit, last year they pretty much got them bang on majority of the time, and it's just a shame, because we want to see everyone get to the front stay there, and that'll be the result. Because the Maverick Vinales one is the best example. Like you say, KTM. We're thinking, well, Maverick's probably going to be in around 6th to 10th place in the Grand Prix, and then Maverick turns into Maverick and just has one of the best races that he's had on the KTM, and he just doesn't get his reward from it. But yeah, that's Tyre Pressures. Deal with it, guys. I'm sorry, but we're going to have to stick around for a bit longer, and I hope this is the last time. Probably won't be, though. We're going to have to talk about it this year. Hopefully not in the length that we've talked about it, because it's been quite a detailed look into it, but we'll get back onto the track action. We'll touch on KTM after. I mean, do you know what? Actually, we'll do KTM first, and then Aprilia. Yeah, Brno seems to be the track for KTM. The last winners here in 2020, when it was such an odd race, and coming into this weekend, Acosta and Bastianini, who food poisoning, 3 kg down, no prior knowledge to the circuit on MotoGP machinery, somehow he ends up on the podium on Saturday, and yeah, Pedro Acosta's there too in the Grand Prix as well. Pedro Acosta holds off Bagnaia to finish on the podium. Lewis, what do you make of KTM in terms of it's a very good track for them. It's obviously proven that now, and with the grip and stuff, but yeah, very good weekend for them overall.
Yeah, it was a good weekend. I think the track surface being really, really grippy has helped KTM. You know, we know the bike tends to kind of flow quite okay, and you know, gets into the corners pretty well, which is, you know, is Bruno's kind of characteristic. You do have quite a lot of sort of hard braking points into kind of flowing corners. So when the KTM has the grip to do that, and therefore I assume it wasn't having the same kind of vibration issues, then, you know, everything seems to work out quite well for it. I would say that we saw that it is firmly the third best manufacturer at Brno,
Yeah.
because, you know, okay, yeah, Bez ended up off the podium in the sprint, but you know, we saw in the Grand Prix that the Aprilia had the measure, and for most of the weekend the Aprilia was faster than that KTM. So I think we've seen over the past few rounds that Pedro Acosta has found a bit more consistency, and we know Maverick, you know, when he's been fit, has been consistently up there. And you know, I think I don't think Brno is a significant turnaround. I think it is probably going to be viewed as kind of an isolated sort of moment, really, and I think Brad Binder's kind of form over the weekend sort of proves that, and that, you know,
Yeah.
he wasn't really anywhere in qualifying. He managed to get into the top 10 in the Grand Prix, but that wasn't what we expected from him, and based on what we saw from the other KTMs, and I think the fact we saw Bastianini being so quick, given he's had no real good form this year, I don't think there was just switch flicked and all of a sudden KTM are now competitive. Even Paul Espargaro being up there, you know, despite the fact that, you know, it's not a knock against Paul, he just hasn't raced in over a year, so, or in about a year, so, you know, he turns up to Brno, he's in the top 10, and it's like, you know, great rider, but I think KTM's kind of grip, or the grip from the surface, really helped KTM this weekend.
Good to see them get a podium though, because they did deserve that one, I think, from Qatar, and like it is good to have every manufacturer now, MotoGP, have a podium this year, which is, yeah, people say, I know Ducati are still dominating it, but you know, look at the results. I'm just trying to think. There was 2 Ducatis inside the top 10 this weekend. Is that right? I think yes. And we had 3 Aprilias and 3 KTMs in there as well, along with the Yamaha too. So I think that I'm not saying that Ducati are under threat here, but the other manufacturers are starting to build something. I think I expected it probably a bit hastily at the early part of the year that they would be more frequently near the front, but it seems that at certain points this year it's odd. Every manufacturer has their weekend and they seem to build. Maybe KTM now going into the summer break and having their home Grand Prix, not an ideal track for them, but I hope that they can do something, because Acosta has, to his credit, changed his mentality, and I think that KTM have openly said they were not happy how he was talking about the project, how he was coming across to the media, and Acosta's even admitted that. And I think that, yeah, it's refreshing to see such a young person anyway, when you think about it, but he's not saying maturing, but he's growing and he's understanding a bit more about how he needs to be more positive, and I think that's a good thing. And really, Aprilia are the ones that I think deserve a lot of praise for this how could I say, the second half of the first half of the season. They've been clearly the second best manufacturer. Marco Bezzecchi continues to really impress me with his performances. Another second place, and he was the guy who took it early on to Mark. But Jorge Martin, Pete, is the guy who everyone was focusing on this weekend. Can he come back and just, say sorry, essentially, to Aprilia? Didn't really do that on Thursday, but that relationship, on camera anyway, and seeing the joy in the garage after, I will say it's actually quite nice and quite refreshing to see that they're all kind of embracing each other, even though things have been said and what's been put out there. Martin 7th in the Grand Prix is not actually it's a really good result, I think, in terms of the grand scheme of the amount of kilometres that he's done over the season so far.
Yeah, it began with a bit of an awkward press conference, didn't it? At the start of the weekend where, Martin confirms he's staying, but at the same time says he sort of didn't regret trying to leave. So it was, I think we were all sort of waiting to see, as we said, what happens on the racetrack, because ultimately that's what counts. And I think, it might sound silly to say it, I think it was almost a perfect weekend for Martin under the circumstances, because, the most important thing, he didn't fall off the bike. He didn't get hurt again, obviously. But not only that, he didn't fall off the bike. He built his confidence. He'd had that private test, but also he just got laps under his belt that he needed, and he just improved throughout the weekend, didn't he? It was a real step into the unknown for the Grand Prix distance, 21 laps, long time, and he showed that he wasn't, what was he, 7th place. I mean, it's nothing for a world champion to be too happy about, but under the circumstances, I think perfect situation for him now. Got through that awkward weekend, I think we can put it as, with Aprilia. He's working with the team. They're starting to rebuild that trust between each other that they're going to have to do, aren't they, after everything that's happened. And at the same time, he can see from Bez's performances that the bike is quick. The bike is obviously capable of podium. It's capable of winning races. We saw at Silverstone, and it's consistent. It's consistently quick. So I think he'll go into the summer break now highly motivated. I think if everyone else is a bit burnt out and heading for the beach, I think it'll be the opposite for Jorge Martin, who's had plenty of time sitting around until now, and he'll be fired up for the remainder of the year now.
Yeah, Lewis, what do you make of his weekend? I suppose it was just good to not see him crash, essentially. I know it sounds really callous saying that, but he didn't crash, and that's the best thing for him, because Bezzecchi had, I think, 3 crashes over the whole weekend. Yeah. And still put it on the box. So Martin can look at it in the sense that Bezzecchi's doing this. Give him maybe a few more rounds. Is it maybe outlandish me saying we could expect Martin to be near the podium soon?
I think the starting point is good. I think 15.8 seconds from the win, in the top 7 is not bad, given he has about 180 kilometres of race kind of mileage underneath him versus about 1,200 for Mark or something like that this year. So I think the thing that stood out for me more was his kind of pace relative to Bezzecchi. He was about half a second a lap slower than Bez, which, given he's competed in 2 out of the 12 rounds this year, didn't have any pre-season testing time, hasn't developed the bike. I think that's actually really, really good. I think that's a really good, to be within half a second, just over half a second of your teammate, on pure pace. Your teammate who's won a Grand Prix this year has been regularly fighting for the podium recently. That's really, really good. I can't stress that enough. So I think going into the next few rounds, the summer breaks come at maybe the wrong time, I guess, for Martin now. As I thought, we probably wants another race next weekend to kind of just build on that momentum, but he can go into the break now and kind of process all that, assimilate all that data he's learned from it, understand, what he now needs to do going into Austria, which is maybe an unfortunate race to kind of start things back again, because it's not really a conventional circuit. But I think, it will be probably by the time we kind of get into the last sort of few races of the season, we'll see Jorge Martin kind of back on the podium. I think if he carries on doing what he's doing, and clearly, I think we've gotten a kind of first answer as well in terms of how is that relationship going to go now? Because we always sort of said that even if Aprilia is successful in getting Martin to stay, is that really going to be a good thing? Because is the rider going to be motivated? I think we've seen that. I think we have seen that he's motivated. I think he's seen now the potential of the bike, even though not necessarily in his sort of results, but he's seen obviously what the bike is capable of for a guy that's barely done any riding this year, what his teammates are able to do. And I think he can now go, okay, water under the bridge, okay, I don't have any regrets. And actually, I kind of respected him for that, being like, I don't have any regrets. I don't apologise because I thought I was doing what was best for me. And you know what? The way he handled this situation, wasn't really kind of becoming of a world champion, but at least he still has kind of the spine to stand on and stand behind his convictions, and that you have to respect. So I think going forward now, I think we have kind of somehow Aprilia has won totally. They've gotten what they wanted out of this kind of battle. They have a rider that actually is motivated. The relationship does seem to be able to be repairable, and it does seem like it is well on its way to being repaired. Somehow Aprilia has pulled off kind of the impossible here. And I think, honestly, that'll embolden them going forward. They'll think, right, we've got the second best bike here. We've got a great lineup now. We've got the world champion back, and he's not far off. We're not that far away from Ducati in races. Marc's in a position where he, doesn't have to push as much anymore, and therefore, if Aprilia gets into a position where they can maybe start to pester him a bit and fight for a win, that's an opportunity to get some big results there. So somehow Aprilia has come away with this just really with the perfect sort of outcome. And yeah, going forward, I think the next half of the season is going to be really interesting for them. I think finally, all eyes are on Martin. Let's take nothing away from Bez. Like he was 153 on the final lap, his best lap of the race. He was
brilliant,
under a tenth of a second, or under 0.1 of a second slower than Marc on average pace. Yeah, Marc had it in hand a little bit, but Bez really pushed, and yeah, I think that was impressive. So don't assume, once Martin gets up to speed that all of a sudden there's going to be a role reversal. I think what Aprilia is going to find is they've got two riders very much capable of keeping a couple of Ducatis off the podium going forward.
Yeah, that's a great point. And actually, to your point, I actually think Bezzecchi being so fast has just lit the fire in Martin as well. Because as you know, the relationship of them two, I mean, they wouldn't go for dinner with each other. That's Marco Bezzecchi's words. So make it up what you will.
But I remember Bez coming to a debrief in Valencia a couple of years ago with a beer in hand, absolutely slagging off Marc Marquez. Being like,
oh, but that's
the dirtiest.
Though, wasn't it?
He's the dirtiest rider. He gets protection from the stewards.
Yeah.
Blah, blah, blah. Now all of a sudden you've got Marc being like, yeah, Bez is great every race, and they're almost seem like best buds now. So
hugging each other and stuff.
I think Bez is probably is someone that's quite good at, he
plays the game very well, doesn't he?
Putting the past behind him, and he's not gonna let these things get in the way of a good time.
No, I just want to see a bit of an inter-team battle there at Aprilia, because I think it's something that, I'm not saying that Viñales and Espargaro of the past had, but I think having these two are quite hungry riders, and the ambition, especially of Bezzecchi being, not saying nationality comes into being the Italian on the Italian bike, really would fire me up. So it would, and I think Martin is going to look at it thinking, well, give it a few races and I'll be right with you, sort of thing. So yeah, that's a good thing for the second half of the year. Keep an eye on the Aprilia battle, and also while I'm talking about Aprilia, I suppose Ralph Fernandez deserves a shout out. Is that his best MotoGP result, or one
joint
of them?
Best, equal
joint
best.
So P5 for him, which I think he had a really good sprint as well. So yeah, Fernandez is doing good things on the trackhouse Aprilia, and is it coincidence with contract time? Maybe, but he's delivering results, isn't he? So
he has a 2-year deal as well, to be fair, so I don't think he's...
Yeah, I'm just thinking ahead though. People assume that everyone's off the grid now in MotoGP because someone has tested for trackhouse. I'm not just saying that, but you know what I mean. People assume that everyone's going to be leaving, so I think he's solidifying his place in Aprilia, and that maybe repaying the faith that they've kind of shown him down the years, because they've always been quite strong on where I think his talent lies. And yeah, let's see if Fernandez can continue his strong form. And then lastly, I want to talk about Joan Mir and Alex Marquez. That will end the podcast on that. Joan Mir, I don't know what this guy has done with his 2025 in terms of luck. We were trying to work out before the podcast how many incidents he's been involved in and getting caught up in it. I think it's 5 or 6 from off the top of her head. Having to avoid Fermin Aldiger and Assen, Jack Miller taking him out in the sprint at Aragon, Agura in Sachsenring, Alex Marquez now at the Brno circuit, where Mir has his best qualifying, I think, for a couple of years, maybe. Even when in Suzuki days, that's how good the qualifying was, and he wasn't even good at qualifying then, so he wasn't. P5 in the sprint, launch control doesn't work, tyre temperatures are off, he drops all the way to the back. And you're thinking, right, it's only a sprint, maybe the Grand Prix will go better. He gets a good start in the Grand Prix, and he was running, I think, P5, I think, at one stage, P6. Alex Marquez coming up to the third last corner, just misjudges it, has a look to the inside, tucks the front, and guess whose rear tyre is right in front of that? It's Joan Mir's, and yeah, Alex Marquez has a long lap penalty for Austria now. And I suppose we can kind of talk about both of them, but we'll start with Mir. Pete, what can you do with this guy? I think even his flight was cancelled as well yesterday, so it's just like, when he just has nothing going for him, it just kicks him again, doesn't it?
It does. Unbelievable, isn't it? As you're saying, he must be riding around just waiting for someone to almost hit him sometimes. I mean, he did say afterwards that he doesn't believe in bad luck and this kind of thing. And he did put, a reasonable theory forward, which is because they're losing so much top speed. Yeah, that he thinks that kind of sucks the others into thinking, because they obviously gain on him heading into a braking zone, into trying a move, but then he's really strong on the brake. So then they have to release the brake to sort of keep up, or at least hold pace or try and pass him, and then incidents happen. So, maybe that's got something to do with it. But it's been such a range of issues, as you say, hitting people that have fallen ahead of him. It's not even been the same thing happening, has it? It's just been all over the place, but the end result has just been he's on the ground. And unbelievable, really. And such a shame, because he should be up there with Joan Mir and Johan Zarco at the championship, shouldn't he? They're really, pace-wise, they've kind of been challenging each other.
Yeah,
Zarco's,
right with each other.
Taken the obviously the victory in the podium, but in terms of just raw speed, Mir has been a challenger for him, but the championship is nowhere near him. And the only thing they are tied on is they've both fallen 15 times so far this year. As I say, Zarco's have been in practice, maybe qualifying mainly. Mir's always seemed to be in the race. So yeah, just I don't know. I don't know what anyone could say to him, really, other than just get it to the checkered flag somehow.
Yeah, I do. I've never known a rider who is just, as you say, doesn't crash in practice or qualify, really. And then when it gets to when the lights go off on the grid, some black magic just seems to happen in the races. I don't get it at all. But yeah, Lewis, we can focus on Alex Marquez here. That by far the worst weekend of the season he's had in terms of the sprint. He was battling with the turn off of Mark. It wasn't that he actually got rid of the turn off. You can see it from the helicopter, but he had how can I describe it? The start in the sprint reminded me a lot of Jorge Martin's at Qatar in 2023, where the rear just spun, and it was like they were like trying to. Martin obviously said it was the tire, but Bastianini and Alex didn't really talk about the tyre that much. It was an odd start for Alex, and his race was over by then. He dropped back to 18th or something. And then in the Grand Prix yesterday, when he's mid-pack, as Pete says, Mir seems to think it's because the bike's losing it a lot. But then Alex got really over-ambitious there and just tried to force something that he didn't need to do. And is this potentially the flaw in Alex Marquez? When he gets into these mid-pack scraps, he always seems to be bumping and barging with people, and it's ruined his championship, really. And now he has to look over his shoulder and think, brother's gone, Pecco's not close it in, but that's my main priority now, because it was a real untidy weekend for Alex, wasn't it?
Yeah, I think Alex Marquez's explanation of what happened kind of feeds into Joan Mir's sort of reason for all these incidents, was that Alex said he wasn't really actually trying to attempt an overtake, he was just seeing if it was possible, and then all of a sudden he ended up on the inside. I think, given the speed advantage of a Ducati over a Honda, it was even kind of stupid to be looking at a move there, honestly. Like, you do it somewhere safe, into the top of the hill, into turn one, somewhere where you've got a run, and then you can brake, you can outbrake on the bike. I think there was no real need to do that, and it was clumsy. I think Alex didn't have a great weekend all in. He was 8th on the grid, which, part of that was because of yellow flags and qualifying, but ultimately he didn't go and do the banker lap. You look at Pecco, for example, and he did, and got pole because of that. So there's, but I think we have seen this before from Alex. The pace has been there. You think, what, Austin last year or the year before, where he kind of got tangled up in the first lap, with Jorge Martin, despite being in a really good position. And we see this a bit too much from Alex, and for the most part he's been good this year. But like I said earlier, that the points when he has bad weekends, bad results, is at the points when Marc is inflicting kind of really big damage on him, and that's why I'm saying these rivals have made it a bit too easy for him, because when they've had their off days, they've done it at a point when Marc hasn't. And if Alex has any designs on being a championship challenger next year, then he needs to find another level, but he needs to tidy all this up, because right now he's not had any problems, continued finishing second on the podium every single race, not DNF'd or anything. The gap would be big, but it would be not that big. It would be a point where Marc couldn't be comfortable, and therefore who knows what happened. Look back at Jerez, as a good example of that. Austin as well, when both times when Marc crashed and Alex ended up with a championship lead. So he needs to get back to that the second half of the season, that consistency, and especially with Pecco not too far behind him now in the championship. And if Bez's results keep going on the way that they are, then they soon might find themselves with a problem there. So kind of an unnecessarily clumsy kind of incident there for Alex Marquez, and I think a single long lap penalty is a fair enough punishment for that.
Yeah, I suppose I can also add that he has time to heal now over the summer break, doesn't he, with his hand injury too. So just not the ending of the first half of the season Alex Marquez wanted, but I don't think he expected to be in the position he would be in this year. So I suppose you can look at it both sides. But that's it really for the podcast. I suppose the last thing I wanted to ask you, gents, give me one word to describe Marc Marquez's first half of the season. I'll start with you, Pete.
Easy. Domination. I think that's it for me.
Lewis?
Yeah, it's the same for me. I don't think there's any other way to sum it up.
I think the word for me is remarkable. In terms of the 5-year thing, we look at it yesterday, the weekend, 5 years since the incident, literally by the day almost, and you think his career changed then, and you think we maybe never would have seen that level again. Probably not seeing that level again with Marc in terms of the outright speed, but in 5 years, from essentially ruining his own career that he said with that injury and coming back too soon, and everything that happened after with diplopia, multiple surgeries on the arm, leaving Honda, where, let's be honest, he probably didn't want to leave because he was trying to stay still, but it wasn't for the others around him telling him to take the chance and jump and bet on himself. 5 years later, he's done 5 race wins in a row, and he's looking set for another world title. I think the guy is just remarkable. So he is, in terms of the mental capacity that he has. And let's see what the second half brings. Will it be any different? I don't think so, because Marc wanted the race this weekend coming, but he says summer break will be nice, but he just wanted to keep the momentum going, so it shows where he's at. He just loves racing, and can anyone stop him? No. And there's even the question, I've seen another podcast talk about, can he go unbeaten for the rest of the season? I'm like, well, hang on, he surely couldn't do that, but no, I'll be, if he does that, just don't even turn up next year if he does that, because that would be ridiculous. But the season belongs to Marc for the first half. Let's see what the second half brings. Many more surprises. I suppose we're going to have to look at the circuits coming up. The flyaways are going to be really interesting, but we'll discuss all that next week. We're going to do like a mid-season sort of grade report for all the riders, so the boys can get to work prepping that, and then we can talk about a few other things in the weeks to come. If you enjoyed this podcast, make sure to subscribe on YouTube, comment, tell us what you thought of the race, tell us what you thought of the weekends at Brno, because the crowds were absolutely outstanding. So they were, I think, for a circuit being off the calendar for that long, and to have the crowds that they had, yeah, that's how you do it. So you do. And if you're listening on Apple or Spotify, 5-star review, it helps out massively. And we'll see you next week. Take care.